All right, today on Top 3, we are having two of the hosts of Chapo Trap House, which you might know as a kind of left-wing political podcast. They are not afraid to speak their minds. They can get into very contentious kind of political discourses. They have been behind books like Chapo's Guide to Revolution, which came out a couple of years ago, and it debuted number 6 on the New York Times bestseller list. And both of them now are doing some special spin-off shows on their Patreon. And these shows are really, really fun. Hell on Earth is a show about the 30 Years' War. And that is hosted by Matt Christman and Chris Raid. And Matt will be on the show today. I really like this because I didn't know that much about the 30 Years' War. And he goes very deep into, and we'll talk to him a little bit about it, but like, it's a history podcast. It really is a history podcast, but it also looks at the 30 Years' War through the lens of now and how there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, and he's put together for us a sort of viewing list, if you will. Movies to watch if you want to get a feel for the tone of the 30 Years' War, which, as he's going to say in a second, is hard because we haven't made a lot of movies about the 30 Years' War.
Yeah, and so it's a companion piece. So if you've been listening to Hell on Earth, which is on the Chapo Trap House Patreon, now this is a way that you can kind of go in and out, see how it's been fictionalized, see what has been different. And then also, Will Menaker is hosting a new show coming out in May with Hessa Denny from Seeking Derangements. Basically, it's a movie podcast, and we're going to let him explain how it's a little bit different than your average movie podcast. But again, that's also going to be available on their Patreon. So, Amy, without any further ado, shall we meet the guys?
Hello, guys.
Let's first talk to you, Matt, about your podcast. Tell us a little bit more about Hell on Earth.
Yeah, that's me and our producer, Chris Wade, going through the 17th century crisis in Europe, with the center point being the 30 Years' War in Germany, which is this huge catastrophe, calamity that is largely unknown, in popular culture. So we're using that as a springboard to talk about a bunch of crazy stuff, including like the Reformation and the military revolution and all this stuff that happens at that period.
Yeah, looking at the movies that you've selected, it feels like you're taking a time period that people might not be familiar with, but when you actually get into what is happening in this time period, it's going to sound like something we're very familiar with, something like we're kind of living through right now.
Oh, yeah, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, looking at it like this idea that, parts that played into this war were, things like climate change, financial collapse. You have like these conspiracy theories driving policy. So all that kind of stuff feels so new to us, but I also feel like it's interesting to see it being just a driving part of history.
Right. I mean, it's essentially what happens when one social order collapses under its own contradictions in one crisis, and that's the feudal order of Europe. And then this new system arises out of that, that we're now kind of at the terminal end of, and we're experiencing that same cycle re-emerging because the thing we try to highlight is that no one who is actually in charge of anything in a crisis like this is able to really address anything that's happening, because to actually do anything to stabilize the system would undermine their own power within it, which they have no interest in doing. So instead, every act they take to try to save themselves ends up just furthering the crisis.
So are you saying the only way out is through?
Yes, basically.
But I will say that as you describe this, I know it's also going to be funny and not just incredibly, it's not going to be heavy in a way. I feel like it's going to still feel like a Chapo show, right? I mean, it's going to have like...
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of, like, we do bands, there's a lot of wild and funny characters in it. Martin Luther is the first guy we sort of focus on, and he is an absolute maniac and a very, again, recognizable character. He is really the first modern poster. Like, he is a guy who made history by just really posting really, really hard and writing and having people read it. And he had a poster's temperament. He was incredibly vitriolic and insulting to everyone who disagreed with him. And he was obsessed with shit. and scatology, and he would talk about how like the Pope should smell his shit and stuff like that all the time. So yeah, there's plenty of jokes, absurdities as well.
When you see repeated patterns like that, do you find it comforting that human beings kind of come from just a few of several templates?
Yeah, I mean, we are always, especially now, like fixated on an idea of an apocalyptic end to humanity, you know, that like a final judgment. And so were the people at this period. Like they were all convinced that they were at the end of days. And when you look at what happened, like they felt vindicated by that. But, you know, people continued on and created new ways of being that have been totally unthinkable to the people beforehand. And that really is the defining cycle of human existence, and we're all like part of it. You know, we're not at the end of anything ever. You know, we're always just stuck within a cycle, and that's something that a lot of people don't like. But I think it's comforting compared to the apocalyptic fixation. I think that is otherwise sort of tempting to take, where you think like this is the end of all humanity, this is the end of life, but it very basically never is.
Yeah, I have to say the only thing that gives me comfort some days when I start going down that apocalyptic rabbit hole is I think your grandma had it worse when she was a little kid in the 1930s.
Yeah.
So they definitely had an excuse to think the world was ending then.
It's not all so bleak, Amy, because from listening to Hell on Earth myself, I've learned that like though the past may seem like it's dead and gone, that's not true. Patriotic Rosicrucians are still in control of our society and government, and they are secretly the secret hand directing all human events and progress. So just put your trust the plan, trust the Rosicrucians.
Well, you know, and I want to bring up Will. We're going to talk about your podcast that's coming out in May in a little bit. But you also have a new podcast coming out, which is going to be Movie Mindset. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of see your top three, maybe through the eyes of both of your podcasts. So obviously we know a little bit about Hell on Earth through what we just heard with Matt. But for Will, just give us a little idea of what Movie Mindset will be, just so we understand how your picks might figure into your podcast.
Well, first of all, with the great success of Hell on Earth, I was like, okay, I can't let Matt and Chris get all the accolades for doing a spin-off series. What can I do here? Where can I bring my expertise? But how can I do that without reading every book ever written about the
100%,
Reformation and the 30 Years' War? I just like watching movies. Reading books, boring.
Yeah, come on.
No, but people have been clamoring. People have been clamoring for decades, or as long as podcasts have existed, people have wanted someone to talk about movies on them. And I'm pleased to say myself and bring in some new blood, my co-host Hessa Denny from Seeking Derangements, we will be for the first time ever discussing movies in a podcast form.
I mean, this is pretty interesting because, after ours, I didn't know that anyone would want to even do this. So now I guess we are in the rare air of two movie podcasts. But I would love to hear you all talk about movies, because I really do believe the key of any of movie podcasts, really any podcast, people are tuning in for the personalities. You could be talking about whatever movie you want, but it really is your perspective on it. It's not the end all be all. Like you can hear 3 different podcasts about Raiders of the Lost Ark and get 3 very different things from it. And I think that's one of the cool things about podcasting in general, but also movie podcasting.
I mean, yeah, that is a very cool thing about movie podcasts, but I would slightly disagree with you, Paul, because this podcast will be the be all end all of all opinions.
And there we go. And
I brook no disagreement. This is like from on high. This is the correct movie podcast with the correct opinions and perspectives on film.
You know what? And as of per our agreement, we will be ending our show after this interview. We'll leave it up for the 30-day window. But I mean, why even bother to have two?
But I do think that your podcast, Will, is the only one that says that talking about movies will initiate you into the mysteries and power of movies as a powerful brain-enhancing nootropic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's almost a medical claim. Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, you will find yourself, you will be gaining muscle mass. Your testosterone will skyrocket. you'll be thinking clearer and sharper, and you will find more success in business, romance, relationships, what have you. Movies can fix all your problems if you merely watch them correctly. I mean, I'm partly joking, but like, look, I love watching movies. I love talking about movies. Movies are like sports to me, like I'm following who's up, who's down, I like arguing about movies. I just like watching movies. But I mean, the germ of the idea that I'm kind of joking about, but one that I think is like a half serious idea, is that movies are more real than reality. Like the illusion of cinema and the experience of watching movies represents like such a convincing and narcotic simulation of reality that I think that they order our memories and thoughts in a way that is like approaching reality, or rather predicts reality before it happens. So I think like through movie mindset, you can pierce the veil of consciousness and reality and discover the truth behind this veil of tears that we all exist in.
I mean, look, Jules Verne kind of saw the future through his novels, and I think that Michael Bay is probably doing the same thing with ambulances and explosions. We didn't know it was possible to blow up a boat that big.
Well, I mean, I know, as Matt has discussed before, I mean, the first 3 Transformers films are, in addition to Southland Tales, basically the only way Americans dealt with the war in Iraq through film.
And you know what? And it was a lot easier to follow. And I feel
Absolutely.
like that's what people needed. So let's jump into it. Each of you have brought 3 movies that are important to you. And for Matt, like we did say, like maybe these are movies that will help us in Hell on Earth, but they could also be off of that too. And then Will, as we've talked about, we'll see if any of these movies that you brought are going to be, stimulating our brain and testosterone. We'll check it out. So who wants to go first with their first pick?
I'll go first.
Okay, great.
So yeah, I brought 3 films that all relate in one way or another to the general subject of Hell on Earth. Only one of them is actually about the 30 Years' War, because it is basically the only English language movie ever made about the 30 Years' War, talking about how this is something that we just don't really have a cultural memory of in the U.S. anyway. But the first one is 1985's Flesh and Blood, Paul Verhoeven's English language debut. And this is a movie that I have a deep relationship with, because it's one of several movies that I saw way too young at my grandparents' house, because they would let me stay over and they had HBO, and I would like watch it till 3 a.m. So I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I'm watching this movie where like Rutger Hauer is raping people, and people are dying of bubonic plague. And it stuck with me. And for years, I didn't even know what it was. I just remember this horrifying scene of those people sitting around a table in a castle, and this kid dumping over the water jug, and a chunk of a dead dog falls out of it. Oh, because they were under the castle's under siege, and somebody hucked a plague-ridden dog over the battlements, and it got into their into their drinking water. And then it was until I was an adult that I was like, oh my God, this is the movie, and it's a fucking Verhoeven movie.
I'm always surprised at the lack of supervision that I had with HBO when I was a kid. Like, my parents are having Thanksgiving dinner and I'm watching Risky Business in the living room. And if they're not walking in, I'm able to get a lot of Risky Business. I didn't even know that it was bad. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she's naked. They're on a subway train. But we did a whole series on Verhoeven. We talked about RoboCop and Starship Troopers. And he's a very interesting director. And I think what you just described, that image, like the imagery and the violence and the way he kind of mixes, I think like commenting on the world, as it were, like it comes through in all of his work. And do you feel like it does here, or is it more schlocky? Like, what do you think?
Well, it's very interesting because it has a lot of story beats and even a lot of sort of visual and audio elements that harken to like a classic romantic adventure. Like
right.
There's literally swinging from chandeliers, and there's big rousing orchestral stings, but the actual content is just brutally, bleakly cynical and depressing. So he's definitely keeping it real in this movie.
I think Verhoeven works so good for a movie about the Middle Ages, and like this movie really makes me sick to my stomach that the big pirate epic, the John McTiernan pirate epic, Cutthroat Island.
Oh,
that
yes.
bankrupted the movie studio. And the next big project they were going to do was a Verhoeven directed Crusades epic starring Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I remember hearing about this. Yeah.
It sickens me that movie never got made, but I think Verhoeven works so well as a director for depicting the medieval era because like all of his films from like his early Dutch films, like Spetters through RoboCop or Total Recall, I think like a consistent theme in his movies is the cheapness and disposability of the human body and human life in general. And, you know, like in Flesh and Blood, the one thing I remember, I mean, one of the Verhoeven factoids that I'll never forget from that movie is that all hanged men cum their pants as their neck breaks. So that's the type of historical biological fact that you're only going to get in a Verhoeven movie.
I think I remember something along those lines too. I feel like it might have been, and we'll talk about him maybe later, but like a Tony Scott movie where I learned that people, like relieve all their body, like they basically shit their pants. And that was like so shocking to me.
Well, Verhoeven is like, he's a guy who grew up surrounded by flesh and bodies like dead on the street.
The Nazis built a V-2 rocket platform in his backyard when he was growing up in Holland.
Oh my God, it's amazing. And now let's talk about your first pick, Will. What are you bringing to the table here?
Well, I mean, you guys asked me for 3 movies that represent movie mindset, but the truth is that all movies represent movie mindset.
Of course. If
you're watching movies, you're engaging in movie mindset. So I picked a theme near and dear to my heart and a theme that's been very important to the history of cinema: trains. You know,
I love it. Yes.
Lumiere brothers, train arrives in station, the scariest film ever created, to, in an era when you needed to present a visual metaphor for 2 adults having sex, the train going into the tunnel was right there. And I'm going to kick off my top 3 train movies with Buster Keaton's The General. A movie about a man and his love for his train. And this movie, the stunts in it hold up like by any Jackie Chan or Tom Cruise movie in present day. Buster Keaton was doing this all in the silent film era. Some unforgettable sequences in this movie, but it is a movie that is so joyous to me, that it's such a beautiful movie. It's so entertaining that it makes me forget I'm rooting for the Confederacy the entire film.
We talked about that. We did an episode on The General, and like the idea that Buster Keaton is playing Confederacy because it just made him a lovable underdog back then.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I think Glory was the first American movie that portrayed the Union Army as the good guys in the Civil War, which is incredible considering that they won that war.
We talked about this when we talked about The General. This is my big thing that I'm always bringing back to this podcast, but I feel like Buster Keaton and Jackass have a similarity. Like when you watch some of the things going on in The General, and I guess Jackie Chan is probably a more apt comparison too. It is wild, but it's so engaging to watch somebody put their life in limb. Risk it all for a movie, because he is like doing things on the front of a moving train. There's no CGI, there's nothing. It is one of the most visceral experiences watching this movie, because not only is it dangerous, but it's more dangerous than we could ever imagine, because at least Jackie Chan had stunt coordinators. They had figured some things out. They maybe, here it was the beginning of let's do stunts.
It's incredible, and you can see that they're kind of like learning on the fly. They're like, yeah, sure, we'll just put a man on the front of a cow catcher on an actual train, and have him like toss giant like wooden girders at other ones to knock them out of the way. Anyway, but yeah, I like the comparison with Jackass, because I would love to see Buster Keaton on Jackass, because like it would be the same kind of stuff, but he would have the totally stoic poker face as like a baby alligator clamped down on his nipple or something like that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that Johnny Knoxville has worn a Confederate flag shirt on Jackass at one point, or maybe I'm just confusing it with Dukes of Hazzard. But I feel like
he was in that movie.
Yeah, so there you go. So look, it all connects. All right, so Matt, let's go back to the 30 Years' War. What's the next movie that kind of pulls everything together for you?
So the next movie does take place during the 30 Years' War, but not in Europe. It takes place in North America, and that is The Witch. And I chose that because one of the big themes of the show is Protestantism and its social role in accommodating and facilitating the growth of capitalism. And one of the big things that Protestantism does is it desocializes Christianity. It takes Christianity, which in medieval Catholicism was sort of defined by a chain of social relationships that you were part of, and turned it into a totally personal thing. And The Witch really is about like kind of where that ends up, because the movie starts with this family who have already fled England for New England, where they think they can do religion more perfectly. But even there, among their fellow Puritans, they're too pure and have to get kicked out of the village. And so then they try to be religious in their, little family unit. And of course, all they do is lie to one another, distrust one another, and then go insane and die.
Well, and this is the thing about this movie, The Witch, where I feel like people were expecting it to be more of like a jump scare movie, and it's much more of like it is like a family drama. It's disturbing for different reasons, I think. It's not like it's not a movie about like witches, it's like, I feel like, or, in that way where, I don't know, I feel like that was a big argument. It wasn't scary enough. But look, A24 movies and horror are a very interesting breed. It's not necessarily the straightforward horror that we're used to. But I really liked it.
But do you buy in some sort of theory that our American identity is shaped by the fact that we are a country made of people who couldn't fit in anywhere else? And we're like, we're out of here, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And they could not facilitate like the social reality of Europe, especially after this dramatic market transformation. And then they come to America, where the fact that there's this expropriatable land that can be, taken by force and then distributed, and as opposed to Europe, where like every square foot of land is spoken for by some inbred freak or another, who has the social power to keep it, and that means that social conflict kind of keeps bubbling. And one of the big things that prevents Europe from totally destroying itself a bunch of times is that it has this vent for people to travel and recreate a society that is fundamentally antisocial. And that frontier allows for this new idea and conception of the individual to arise that is only viable when you have the possibility to just walk out of the village and live by yourself in the woods until you are driven insane by your fantasy of persecution and guilt that you have no way to socially discharge anymore.
Healthy foundation.
Yeah, exactly. Very healthy foundation.
Hello, my name is Amy Nicholson, and I am here to tell you about a really embarrassing disease that I have, which is I am a diagnosed Googler. Whenever there's anything weird with my body, I just head to the internet, I start putting in random words, and in about 15 minutes, I'm convinced that I have some sort of disease that I can't even pronounce. And I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in this. I have a lot of friends who are like this. We're throwing random stuff in the group chat. We're like, do you have this weird thing? What's this? I don't know. And a lot of this is just because I personally know that I create so many hurdles to the act of going to the doctor. It always sounds so hard, and then it is actually never as hard as I make it sound, but it always sounds so hard. And so that is why I want to talk to you about ZocDoc. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them, and treat almost every condition under the sun. In short, ZocDoc is the app to get over that hurdle of actually asking somebody who knows what they're doing, what is possibly wrong, and just getting yourself back in alignment, getting yourself fixed, getting over that mental hurdle of like, oh man, the doctor is going to be so long and scary, and I don't even know if I'll find somebody good. ZocDoc is great because it gives you this trusted guide to help connect you to your favorite doctor that you haven't even met yet. There could be somebody in your neighborhood right now who is close to you, patient reviewed by thousands of people who's like, they're great. And they fit your needs, they fit your schedule, and taking care of yourself could be a little bit easier. We don't want to be those people who put off something that seems small and then becomes important. Let's just be healthy right now. Why not? Our bodies, they're temples, people. And ZocDoc will help you take care of that temple. When you use ZocDoc, you can choose from thousands of patient-reviewed doctors and specialists. You can browse doctor profiles. You can upload and verify your insurance information. I know that is very important to everybody out there, including myself. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to ZocDoc.com/unspooled and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then you can find and book a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. Imagine that little thing that's kind of bothering you. What if I told you right now that in 24 hours, you'd be on your way to figuring out what's wrong? Doesn't that sound great? Okay, well then you want to go to ZocDoc.com/unspooled. That's ZocDoc.com/unspooled.
These days, electric vehicles are everywhere. We got Silicon Valley CEOs and grandmas driving them. But remember who started this trend? It was our good friends over at Nissan with the Nissan Leaf. People, electric goes back even further than you think, because Nissan has been in the game since when? Guess at the time. 1947. I guarantee you no one said this, and if you did, you already heard this commercial, okay? Since then, their electric vehicles have traveled 8 billion miles. That's right, 8 billion miles driven by Leaf owners globally since 2010. Nissan EVs have been everywhere from the North Pole to a Formula E track to your coworker's garage. Let me tell you, they need to clean that garage. Your coworker has some weird stuff in there. Take down those posters that were in your high school room. It's creepy now. Now, look, I'm going to tell you this much. If you're thinking about making the jump to electric, do it with the professionals, okay? Do it with the ones who've been doing it since the 1940s. Put the electric and EV with the Nissan Ariya and the Nissan Leaf. Visit nissanusa.com to learn more. Nissan, EVs that electrify. Well, I feel like, to kind of alleviate some of that darkness, we have to go back to Will and your movies and trains. And this one is a movie I've never heard of, but I should have, because first of all, well, tell me about it, and I'll tell you. I mean, it's got a great directors, great cast, but it's one that I've just passed me by.
If you haven't seen this one, I'd highly recommend jumping the queue to throw this one on. And and as a little preview of the Movie Mindset podcast, each episode will feature a double feature about a director or an actor that that Hessa and I consider, God level. And the one we're going to, the first one, Buster Keaton, one of the greatest filmmakers and stars of the silent era, like an auteur of action and comedy. And with this movie, we get, I think, truly a genius of the action movie genre. And that is John Frankenheimer. And the film is The Train. That's right. It's a movie that delivers on the promise of its title. It's a movie about a train starring Burt Lancaster as a heroic train conductor and part of the French resistance during the Nazi occupation of France. And the movie concerns this evil SS officer who was in charge of the Nazi occupation of France. They're moving out of France because the war is not going great, but not before he loots every major modernist painting and artistic heritage treasure of the French people. They load it onto a train and they're going to just go across the border to Germany, stealing all of France's most beloved national treasures, but not before Burt Lancaster and the entire French railroad community come together to stop them. It is a great action movie. It's Burt Lancaster at the top of his game. It's Frankenheimer. Highly recommend The Train.
This looks great, and I love this idea. And I also feel like this is a movie that has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd, but it's a movie that kind of seems like a failure because the budget was $6.7 million and it only made $6.8 million. It barely made its money back.
I'm surprised they let Frankenheimer make another movie after this one. But yeah,
Frankenheimer seems to have a hard time. He really gets dealt a bad hand a lot of the time.
He mastered trains in this movie and would go on to master cars in Ronin. So
yes,
he's a very vehicle based director. But
by the way, you know that the whole reason why Ronin exists is because
of Island of Dr. Moreau, right?
Yes.
Okay.
He made like a deal. Like, if you come in here and save this movie, you'll get to make this movie that no one wants to make. I liked Ronan when I saw it. So
Ronan kicked ass, yeah. And then famously he said, "I wouldn't cast that motherfucker Val Kilmer in the Val Kilmer story after working with him on the Island of Dr. Moreau."
Definitely overdue for a Frankenheimer on our own show. So I feel like you've thrown a gauntlet for us, which is good. But there is an idea in The Train that I really love that I'd kind of love to hear your thought of, which I feel like this whole movie wrestles with this idea of what should we value most on this planet as human beings? Should we value these valuable artifacts? Should we value these masterpieces? Or should we value the human life that it takes to get them back?
I mean, that's a very good point, and it's a question that the movie deals with because, spoiler alert, a lot of people die to save these impressionist paintings. But in a war, right, like you want to stop the Nazis from killing people and killing members of the French resistance, but then it gets us like, well, what are you fighting for? If not like the cultural heritage of the nation of France, and of which, these works of art are like a huge part of. So like, if these people live, but then like the history of your culture is just stolen from you, like, I don't know, like, is that worth sacrificing your life for?
Is it? What do you think?
Yes, but not for the impressionists, a bit treacly in my opinion.
All right. Matt, let's go back to the 30 Years War. And now, how does your last film tie in? Because this is a different type of film.
So this is the only English language movie that's specifically about the 30 Years War I'm aware of. It's from 1971 called The Last Valley. It's based on a German novel, and adapted by James Clavell, who was the director. He was the guy who wrote all those giant books in the 70s that became miniseries like Shogun.
I had no idea he directed anything.
Yeah, he directed several films. And this is an attempt to make a big sweeping epic about the 30 Years War. And it's about this valley, the last valley, that's like the one village that has survived into the third decade of the 30 Years War without being completely despoiled. And it's about this wandering teacher, played by Omar Sharif, who brokers a deal between the town inhabitants and this group of mercenaries led by Michael Caine doing a German accent, into allowing them to stay there for the winter, not take everything back to their army, and essentially desert and just live in the village. And it's not very good. I have to warn anybody who wants to see it, but it is very interesting. And it's especially interesting to see the way that the times that it was made in determine the interpretation of the material. It very much is fixated on the idea that the 30 Years War was caused by religious fanaticism and superstition and people not being reasonable and rational. And like characters like Michael Caine's mercenary guy, like he's a bad dude who kills a lot of people, but he knows that it's all bullshit, which makes him sort of a tragic anti-hero. And the reality is that the 30 Years War, was the Reformation had happened over 100 years by that point. The thing that drove the 30 Years War to such heights of violence is that it happened during this period of massive climactic cooling, this little ice age that dropped the temperature in Europe 2.5 degrees and led to a huge drop in agricultural productivity. And that sharpened every conflict into its most violent expression. But this was made in 1971, and the general vibe of sort of anti-authoritarianism pervades the entire thing. And Clavell, who was like an Ayn Rand libertarian, wants to get across the idea that it's these superstitious priests and their sky fairy that get us into this stuff.
Oh wow.
I love what you're talking about because it's just like how Paul said, if you did 3 podcasts on Raiders of the Lost Ark, they'd all be a little different. It sounds like there's so much history colliding in the 30 Years War that whoever makes a film about that, you almost learn more about them even than the war itself.
Absolutely. You have to like pick a lane if you want to like get anywhere, and that's going to show your hand.
What would your 30 years take be?
What the take that we're having on the pod, and that I would want to emphasize, if I were to do anything, dramatic about it, is the material conditions that sort of bind everyone and push them in directions without their real knowledge. Like
Right.
people think they're fighting for God or whatever, but they're actually just struggling to stay at the top of to keep their heads above water in a situation where God's hand, like in the form of natural reality and the acts of nature, are tipping over the world as they understand it. And they only have the tools that they have used to live until that point to keep living, even though they are now insufficient. They can't do the job they used to do, but there is no way for anyone to know that. The only way to learn that is through the struggle, and then for the emergence of something after that.
I wonder if the art form will exist long enough for somebody to make a movie about today's time period in 100 years.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So it'll be a hologram that you can watch up behind your eyelids. Or it'll be a puppet show like in an abandoned Kroger. Those are the two options.
All right, so let's go, Will, for your last pick, which is one of my favorites, an underrated classic, I think. Tell us what you got.
This is a gem, and I swear to God, when I chose this to be my final train movie, I didn't know there would be such a compelling news hook on the day we're recording it. But indeed, the movie I've chosen is Tony Scott's last film, Unstoppable.
Yes.
Which is, a heavily fictionalized account of two heroic rail workers who prevent a train crash from spilling tons of extremely toxic chemicals into the atmosphere, which has just happened in Ohio. So, and it's like the movie is about a greedy railroad company endangering thousands of lives. But unfortunately, in our reality, Chris Pine and Denzel Washington were not there to avert this disaster.
Tony Scott, to me, is a director who does something that most people don't know how to do, which is make a great popcorn movie. They are super fun, and I think we've lost that. I always felt like his movies came in at 90 minutes. They were great. They normally had Denzel Washington, and it just was he just knew how to master this genre of a great fun action movie. And I'm bummed that we never got to see Gerard Butler and Tony Scott team up, because I think that would have been a great mix.
What could have been. But yeah, I mean, what I love about this movie, it's Tony Scott's last movie. It's a great, as you said, Paul, it's just a rip-roaring, fun, popcorn movie about two, blue-collar working class heroes. And it's got an unstoppable, out-of-control train. And it's got so much just excellent train action. But what I love about it, in addition, is just a summation of Tony Scott's whole career, and a real textbook example of seeing his style evolve. Because, if you go back to Top Gun, which is one of the best popcorn, just a dreamy California, just everything glows in that movie, and it's just but his camera work was a lot more formal. It was a lot more classically composed. And then as his career goes on, as you see in Man on Fire and Deja Vu and his later or Domino, his later movies, and then finally in Unstoppable, he is just the king of throwing everything at the screen, just pulling out all the breaks. I mean, you want to talk about Unstoppable, but just lens filters, helicopter shots, insane editing, his camera is always moving and always showing you something from any conceivable angle. There's nothing out of pocket for him. He will put a camera anywhere to get you to show movement and action.
I also think he's probably the best director that adapted a Quentin Tarantino story, because I do feel Quentin Tarantino would have done True Romance differently. That's his script, but I also feel he got the vibe of Quentin Tarantino, and it's a really nice. I like that partnership there, and and when you listen to Quentin Tarantino talk about True Romance, it's I would have done this different, but there is that movie especially has so many different stylistic qualities. He's a really interesting director who I think gets overlooked in the sense that, oh, well, yeah, these are just these kind of movies, but they are the ones, I don't know, Man on Fire, Unstoppable, Top Gun, True Romance, Days of Thunder, Crimson Tide. These are all, they kind of have this interesting, connection in our culture. They're not Academy Award movies, but they are like these really fun movies that I think everyone's seen, at least on TBS.
Okay, I want to ask everybody a question. Actually, I want to ask everybody two questions. First question, Tony Scott or Ridley Scott?
Tony Scott.
Tony.
No
Ooh,
question.
Triple Tony.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Oh my
down
gosh.
for that.
When it comes down to like Ridley, it's like Ridley's got, like, in my opinion, like 3 masterpieces that like have buttressed his entire career. But if you look at like the IMDb, if you just look at their whole body of work, like Tony has an unquestionably higher batting average, and I think is a better director than his brother.
I agree. I think like a movie like Last Boy Scout, Beverly Hills Cop 2, those things made such a giant impact on myself, on me. And it's like, and I will even say, and maybe I'm crazy for saying this, but I remember even watching the A-Team and going like, there's something fun here. Like I would have liked to have seen that figured out in a bigger way. But even that was like, that was kind of fun. It was just a fun movie.
Okay, second question. Favorite Chris? Because here we've got Chris Pine, but are you guys Pine guys, Pratt guys, Evans guys, or Hemsworth guys?
They've all sort of flattened into one, like sort of flesh blob to me. But I would say, based on Unstoppable and Hell or High Water, I'd have to go with Chris Pine, because I'm not sure if Evans, Pratt, or
Hemsworth.
Chris Wade, I don't know, Hemsworth has made a movie, has made any movies at like as good as Hell or High Water or Unstoppable. So I think Pine has the edge for me.
I think that's true. I think that's absolutely correct. He's got the best filmography. But in terms of just as an actor and their general vibe, I like Chris Evans. I guess that makes me a normie, but I don't know. I actually really like what he did with Captain America, because that is like, he's like Superman. He's a very boring character, but he has the most enjoyable performance of anyone from that run of Marvel movies. That's not saying much, but and when I see him, I'm like, there he is. Look at that guy. He's so handsome.
I have a similar point of view, which is I think Chris Pine is awesome. His movie choices are great. I saw him do a stage show and he was phenomenal. But I also think to have that middle ground, and I think this is like everyone's always chasing after, like, and maybe I'm overusing this, but like the Harrison Ford energy. Like, who's this guy who's like a guy's guy, but also fun? And I feel like Evans has that interesting middle ground sometimes, where he's like, I feel like he can be a little bit looser and also work in that action hero thing. Like where Chris Pine, I don't know. I'm kind of, as I'm talking myself out of it now, I'm like, okay, I feel like Chris Pine is like that. I don't know. Chris Pine and Chris Evans, I feel like I'm going to grab Chris Pine. I'm going to say that maybe there's more out there we can see, because I like him as in Star Trek as well.
I think I'm also going Pine, specifically because that man can sing. He can also sing. And I don't know if Chris Evans can sing, but when you can do all of these things together the way both of them can, action and comedy and romantic movie, suffering through superheroes and being in outer space and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but then you can also sing, you got to go Pine. Only one of them was in Into the Woods.
Guys, this has been really fascinating. Hell on Earth, you can listen to it right now. Movie Mindset is coming out in May, so in just a couple months. How many episodes have you recorded already for Movie Mindset, or have you not?
We have not recorded any episodes yet. This is very in the embryonic phase of Movie Mindset, but it will soon to be birthed like the Antichrist from the womb of a jackal into the podcast realm.
Will, can we follow you on Letterboxd, or do you subscribe to that kind of a thing? Okay,
I am
great.
on yes. Oh, absolutely. It's my favorite social media app.
I love it. It's my favorite.
I'd say just look Will Menaker. I'm at Cody Dad 420 on Letterboxd.
Okay, and so now Hell on Earth. You've now tackled so much here, Matt. You've read a lot of books. You are trying to do a comprehensive miniseries. Are you daunted by this, or do you want to go off and do another one now that you've got this miniseries under your belt?
Well, I know that my partner in the project, Chris Wade, he wants a long break because he has to do a lot more than I do to write. Because like we both read and we both write the scripts, but he also has to do all this editing and because he has technical abilities that I don't. So he needs some time to recover. But I've already started thinking about what I'd like to do for the next one, because it was really fun and I think it's pretty good. So I'd like to do another one.
And you are about, right now, we're about midway through Hell on Earth's season when this is coming out. And so perfect time for you guys to catch up and check out what you all are doing. And I'll tell you this much, I know a lot of people love that hardcore history. It's great, but this is so much more fun to listen to, and it's a lot shorter. And
that is true.
And I say, like, sometimes I want my history, but I don't need. I can't. I don't know if I can commit 4 hours per episode. So this is coming in a nice manageable time to listen to. And then let's just talk about the Chapo Trap House world. I mean, this is just offshoots of the main thing. What do you want people to know about where you guys come from? I mean, the mothership, if you will.
Well, the SS Chapo is still going strong. Cutting across the ocean of the media landscape. But the Chapo, the main show. I mean, what I like about it is, like, Movie Mindset and Hell on Earth are obvious outgrowths of it because, history, movies, politics, like, these are the things that we do about the show. And what I like about Chapo is that, like, any episode of the show can basically be whatever we want it to be. But I like now with these miniseries, we're refining these these heavy currents that have always existed in the show, and we're like channeling them into something that's like more focused and like I think hopefully powerful.
I really loved what you did. I listened to the Bomani Jones episode. I love him on his show where but you brought this. I don't know. I thought it was really interesting how you could talk about like players and what's going on there and like the labor unions of that world. It was a very interesting conversation that I feel like people don't even really have those conversations. And I've been thinking a lot about this in the whole trade deadline at the NBA. Like, these people are human beings, and obviously that's known, but the way that they're spoken about, the way that they're kind of treated is as if they are these material objects, and there's been a lot of talk about health, and they're oversitting players because these big owners who spent multi-million dollars, like, they don't want them to play. They want them to, there's a lot of stuff going on in that industry. And I thought it was a really interesting conversation to have.
Oh, thank you. I had a great time talking to Bomani, and a great time to have him on right before the Super Bowl and the NBA trade deadline.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to ask him about Kevin Durant to the Suns.
Oh my gosh. I found out about that before anyone else. And I was sitting, I'm not a reporter. I can't leak it. I just knew it. And I was like, oh, this is so great just to have like that information and not be able to talk to anybody about it was, a great.
What do you got? You're friends with Chris Paul or something? You getting texts?
You know what? It was because I'm a huge Clippers fan, and some people will be like, "Oh, what have you heard?" And I'll have a couple conversations, and then I got a text from a friend who was a little bit more connected, and that was it. It was like Durant to Suns. I was like, what?
I thought you were going to say you were an exotic dancer, the way that we all found out that James Harden was going to Philadelphia last year. So one of my favorite NBA moments that's ever happened. And by the way, Paul and I were texting all day about the NBA trade deadline, and I only found about Kennard after the fact. And I want to say, I will miss yelling Kennard at the screen when the Lakers play the Clippers.
Oh my gosh. Well, you get to see him when he plays the Grizzlies, and he'll be great. Guys, Chapo Trap House, wherever you get your podcasts, you can go to your main website, chapotraphouse.com. You guys get merch, live shows, all that sort of stuff. What a pleasure. Can't wait for Movie Mindset. Can't wait to finish Hell on Earth. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Will, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Our pleasure. Paul, Amy, thanks for having us on.
A big thank you to our producer, Josh Richmond, our associate producer, Jessica Cisneros, our engineer, Casey Holford, our EPs, Cody Fisher and Colin Anderson, our MVP, Molly Reynolds, our theme song by Michael Cassidy, our fan art by Kim Troxall. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, rate, review, and follow us on Apple and also on Amazon. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and you can talk about all these movies on the Paul Scheer Discord. Just go to discord.gg/Paul Scheer. Unspooled t-shirts are available at tpublic.com/unspooled, but you can also get your very own deck of unspooled playing cards, which are absolutely gorgeous, all designed by Kim Troxall at podswag.com. Just find the Unspooled show and you'll see it right there. You can hear past episodes of the show and bonuses like Screen Test on Stitcher Premium. And for the official API, that's the Paul and Amy Institute list of our favorite films that we've ever done from the show, you can head on over to unspooledpod.com.